Hi, welcome to season 2, episode 1 for the future of work. My name's Gavin O'Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News. This is the first episode of our second season. We co-produced with NCFE. Season 1 was all around the future of assessment. This is all around the future of work. And today we've got a really cool episode. We're looking at skills gaps, which is incredibly topical, but we're looking at skills gaps 2022 and beyond. My co-host is Dan Howard from NCFE. Dan, do you want to join me in the studio? Hey, Dan, how are you?
Hello, good morning. You all right?
Yeah, really good. Today, we're going to be talking about skills gaps. And I think maybe if we could, before we bring our guests in, because we've got another Gavin from World Skills, and we've got Anthony from MC Burning Glass, and we're going to be able to look really cool guests because we've got sort of two different dimensions, one around sort of data and labour market information, the other looking international and what we're doing. Particularly, I'm interested what NCFE World Skills doing for the Centre of Excellence, what that means for skills gaps. But bringing it in, first of all, that sort of job for life seems to be a bit of a thing of the past, doesn't it? If you know what I mean, the pandemic has sort of sped things up and changed things. We're in an exciting time, really. So, is this how do we sort of explore education and skills role in sort of jobs of the now and jobs of the future, really? And it's meaningful and sustainable employment. I mean, Dan, I know before the conversation and the live streams, we had loads of chats about this here. I mean, what's your sort of views on the role of education and skills for sustainable and long-term sort of, empathetic sort of roles for people where they actually feel that they've got purpose? Do you know what I mean? And they can sort of move into roles that are, sustainable and long-term.
I think, firstly, thank you for having me this morning. It's nice to have a reason to put a shirt on, Gavin. I think they are so interdependent and go hand in hand, because without the right skills, knowledge and behaviors, how can you succeed not just in the world of work, but in everyday life? And I think you're absolutely right. I think, that one career for life is somewhat rare these days. And people will transition from, one sector to another. We've seen that as a result of the pandemic. We've seen increases of people changing sectors. We've seen a whole raft of digitalization across many industries, education just being one of them, where we're meeting remotely now and probably would have done this face-to-face 2 years ago. So I think we've seen technology and kind of the enhancement and the use of technology more accepted more widely. I think we've also seen more empathy from employers and the flexibility and almost hybrid working practices that we've seen over the last 2 years, where productivity hasn't actually been impacted. So I think there's a number of different factors you can throw into the mix, but without the right knowledge, skills, I mean, you shouldn't underestimate what the life-changing power of education can give you. And the doors that can open. I'm a big believer in that. It's why I work in education. It's something that makes me tick. And I think it's around understanding what are those core transferable skills, regardless of any sector that you work within, because you can take them from one career to another. And I think it's also really interesting that I've got an 8-year-old son, and his job probably hasn't been invented yet. And I sometimes find it quite difficult when, he's in primary school in year 3 and teachers are asking him, what does he want to be when he grows up? And at 8 years old, that's quite a lot of pressure for him to kind of think about, okay, well, what do I want to do? And, he wants to be a YouTuber, of course, and he wants to be an influencer. And I said that, yeah, fine. If that makes you happy, kid, crack on. But the job that my son will probably do doesn't even exist yet. And that's quite exciting. It's quite nervy as well. And I think the unknown is somewhat challenging for people to kind of get their heads around, certainly for kind of the older generation, where if you think about people who have been in jobs and had careers for a long time and find themselves, in the 50 plus bracket and having to reskill, retrain. I always kind of use my dad as an example as well, where, he's worked in construction majority of his life. He's 60 next month, and he's, done very physical manual work. And I always say to him, he should be almost kind of getting to the point where he's in a coaching capacity, or he's, supporting new entrants into his workplace to pass on the knowledge and skills that he has, which is still a valuable asset to the business he works in, but actually isn't as physical on him as a man in his 60s. So I think it's around the different opportunities, the different use of technology, the different skill sets that people have where we don't necessarily know that we can apply them to a different industry or sector. So there's, hopefully a massive opportunity to discuss that today.
Yeah, I think you've really put that really, really well around. Yeah, how do we help the younger generation with a lot of the roles don't exist yet? And I've got kids too. I remember my son when he was about 8, when I took him all to World Skills Calgary. And he was on oil rigs and looking on, doing sort of aircraft maintenance, ended up doing that at college and stuff. And it was really inspirational for him. Also took my mum and dad as well. And it was quite interesting around what that meant. I couldn't go to Canada without bringing everyone. And it was this sort of one of those ones where it was really interesting. So I think you covered 2 really interesting points. How do we help the younger people, but also how do we help people, career changes? We're getting asked to work forever, aren't we? So how can we help the older generation to be able to have sustainable long-term careers? And coaching, I think, is really interesting. Can I bring in our guests? Anthony, can I bring you in from MC Burning Glass? And Gavin from World Skills UK. How are you both?
Great, Gavin. Good to see everyone. Hi, Dan. Hi, Gavin.
Hi. Great to be here. Hi, Gavin. Hi, Dan. Hi, Anthony. And it's going to get confusing with the 2 Gavins, so hopefully...
we'll have to do a Gavin O and a Gavin M or something like
that. I think can I start this with World Skills, Gavin, maybe, around and Anthony, please feel free to come in on this, but the preparing ourselves for the world of work, okay, and the skills that people need to navigate everyday life, as well as having rewarding and fulfilling careers. What would you say at the moment are the biggest kind of skills gaps that we're seeing emerging, certainly as we're coming out of lockdowns and pandemic? Because I would probably assume that that's shifted significantly since pre-COVID days. So what would you say the biggest skills gaps that we're seeing emerging at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'm sure Anthony will add some, context here. But I suppose firstly to start from the macro level. So we're at World Skills UK, many know we're part of a global movement of 80 countries. And so what that provides us with is a platform to actually gather insights and to learn from what other countries and forward-looking economies are doing. So actually one of our peers recently did a big bit of research looking at the future skills and megatrends. And they identified, probably unsurprisingly, that digitization, automation and green are sort of the key, skills gaps now and, as we move forward. And then on a micro level, we recently ran a report with Learning Work Institute that interviewed 2,000 young people, 1,000 businesses, and actually, looking at what are the digital skills that industry needs and what do young people, think they have and think they need. And what was, really clear in that is 92% of businesses said that they require basic digital skills, and then over a quarter said they need advanced digital skills, and that demand is going to grow. However, like the real shocking bit, and I think there's some conversation to be had around it, is that the participation in digital skills training has actually declined. So that's on GCSE level, A level, and further education courses and apprenticeships. And something just to add in there is, I was reading an article this morning in the FT, and it was talking about how actually all businesses now are competing for the same digital skills. So banks are now digital businesses as well as your tech startups and your technical businesses. So that is creating more of a skills gap because there's that bigger demand and that labour shortage.
You're right, and I think it was last year where it might have been the year before now. Gosh, time goes when you're sat in your kitchen, doesn't it? I think the legal entitlement for essential digital skills and the essential digital skills framework came out from government, and NCFE as a educational services charity, have developed the essential digital skills qualification, and it's really interesting, that point on participation, because we can see that the stark figures, in the tens of millions of people who lack the basic essential digital skills, not just for the world of work, but for everyday life, transacting safely online, etc. But the participation at the moment has been low, and uptake on essential digital skills qualifications have been low. And I think that's probably because of the nature of the delivery model at the moment. I think, if you're needing to understand how to use technology and having to navigate, how to use a computer, turn it on and get on the internet and do certain things, you can't do that distance learning. That's traditionally classroom-based delivery. And I think, the challenge has been, certainly over the last couple of years, is that we've been trying to learn from home, or we've had reduced numbers been allowed into our educational environments because of social distancing measures and restrictions, etc. So I think it's really interesting that hopefully, as we're coming out of Plan B, and we start to see the world open up more freely, that I'm hopeful we'll see more participation in the likes of essential digital skills qualifications moving forward.
Just on that, Dan, so what was interesting as well is the assumption. So I think it's the assumption that young people have those skills, and there's an assumption from business that is what they have, and young people believe they have it. But actually, what we've found is when they're getting into employment, that's where the gaps are. So, some things that we take for granted. Completely to your points, it's how we sort of embed that into the education.
And it's,
that's great.
Stuck on the devices, aren't they? But can they problem solve properly? Can they think? Anthony, it'd be really
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of chiming with what you're just touching on there. Skills gap is really an interesting term in its own right, because of course that's going to mean something different to an employer versus a young person preparing to enter the labour market versus an existing worker who may feel that they have a personal skills gap that's stopping them progressing. So what I do definitely think exists is an information gap. So we have employers, educators, individuals, young and adults, who are all really wanting the same things, so including enjoyable, sustainable, productive employment, but perhaps they're all explaining a skills gap in understanding what a skills gap is in slightly different ways. But if we think about skills and we think about data, which we all know that everyone loves labour market data, and if we think about skills that have increased in demand a lot over this past couple of years, right across the UK, so we see a combination really. So we see lots of technical skills, like a massive increase in demand for things like agile methodology, numerous specific digital skills, to your point, Gavin, whether they be programming skills or other skills. And then also, of course, this past couple of years, a significant increased demand in particular healthcare, personal care, social care skills because of everything that's gone on. But interestingly as well, and this is something you touched on at the start, Dan, we've also seen a huge increase from employers for things like compassion and mentorship coming through in employee demand. So they're things that are, of course, cross-cutting and apply across different sectors, different jobs, and even apply across how work is done differently. So I think keeping an eye on terms like that appearing more and more in 2020 and beyond is going to be really key, because that's sort of reflecting that changing world of work, and perhaps even reflecting the preferences of younger people as they enter the labour market and how they want to go about delivering the job that they have.
I don't want to mention the B word, but we've seen certain challenges within certain industries, haven't we? Driving, I mean, I think single-handedly I've kept Amazon going over the last 2 years, and my recycling, the muscles on my refuse collection guy have got significantly bigger as has been, pulling my recycling bin down the drive. But I think, as we look to the government's response to certain things and the gaps that we've seen emerging, we've got various different government initiatives, haven't we? We've got the Levelling Up agenda, we've got the FE Skills White Paper Plan for Jobs. I think employers are mentioned about 243 times within that document. Really putting the ownership onto employers in terms of what skills do they actually want in their particular industry, in their particular region, to have successful businesses. So I think what will be really interesting to kind of look at what other interventions, and I'm probably stealing some of Gavin's questions here, but what other interventions could, if as a young person navigating what is a complex labour market, made more so complex over the last couple of years because of opportunity and the labour market changes, what could a young person do to prepare themselves, or even an adult, for the world of work now, but what would that look like in 10 years' time?
Can I jump in on that one? So, I mean, the thing that is really clear, and Gavin and Dan, you touched on at the beginning, is the pace of change is huge, and the reality is that industry don't know exactly what the future jobs are going to look like in 10 years, and and we don't in this room, but we can look at the trends which we've discussed. But I think what employers are telling us they need young people that have the mindset, who are open to change, who can problem solve, who are resilient, so that they can actually, get through this consistent change that, we're going to see over the next sort of decade. So that's where programs like our competition-based training programs, and things like pressure testing, as a form of assessment, are imperative, because we know that they really build that resilience and that mindset, so that, young people can succeed. But then on the same side, obviously, is, educators. So, we need educators who are consistently learning and open to these new possibilities, and looking at, what does driverless cars look like, and, the more reliance on automation. And that's where programs like, we're delivering in partnership with NCFE, the Centre of Excellence, and things like our Innovation Network. And that's all about bringing these international learnings and embedding that I suppose that excellence and that aspiration for excellence, into education and into the curriculum. And then finally, sort of, from us, what we can do is, we can be looking at those other major economies in those countries, and, looking at, the international benchmarking, and where we're lagging behind. Because I think what's really clear is that high quality skills are going to be the future driver of, of the skills economy.
Yeah,
and just on that same point, really, from the data side. So generally speaking, a bit of a boring point to start with, but it'll get exciting. But bear with me. Generally speaking, the types of jobs or occupations in a labour market don't tend to change massively in a short space of time. So if we think back, say, 10 years, you'd have senior leadership and technical jobs making up maybe a third of the UK labour market. Then you have things like the trades, care, customer service. They all make up about 10% of jobs, etc., etc. That breakdown's the same 10 years on, so it's largely the same, and that is unlikely to change massively over the next 5-10 years. However, and this is getting to the exciting bit that I promised, there are things that do change, and 3 things in particular: skills, which we've kind of already touched on a little bit, regional differences across industries and jobs, which is key. And then thirdly, new emerging things, new emerging jobs and new emerging skills that are needed. And so it's the nuance really across those 3 things that I think we'll see changing across the next 10 years. A couple of examples of that. So digital jobs and digital skills would be an obvious one, and we've kind of touched on that a little bit already. Another one would be green jobs and green skills. Now that, of course, is a topic, and we could have a session in its own right about green skills and green jobs, because you can talk about the greenification of existing jobs, or you can talk about brand new jobs and technologies that are being created off the back of the green agenda. But the core point there is that there's definitely a growth in demand in emerging jobs and emerging skills. So for new green jobs, demand from employers for those has probably doubled in the past few years. So that sustainable greenification topic across the labour market is likely to continue. So I think with that, just with that example in mind, it's all of those small nuances across regions and across different types of jobs and different types of sectors that are really driving change, rather than any, one or two big changes that's going to cross all jobs and all sectors. They don't really exist. It's that small, nuanced changes that's really the exciting stuff.
Would you say then sorry, Gavin. Would you say that it's obviously the occupational, the vocational technical expertise in order to secure a certain job, from an occupational competency perspective, are really important. But would you then also say then, what I'm hearing is it's those kind of cross-cutting essential skills that we refer to here at NCFE, such as, creativity, resilience, adaptability, compassion, as we've heard this morning. There is equally as important to have those kind of knowledge and skills embedded and those behaviors, as well as the technical and vocational elements.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of examples of that, and it tends to be both. So again, if we think of regions, there'll be significant and specific requirements in a region for both technical and cross-cutting skills. So a quick example of that, one of the fastest growing skills, possibly the fastest growing skills over the past few years in Manchester has been AWS, so Amazon Web Services, what that all means. And that crosses, of course, a number of different sectors and a number of different jobs. We see that in a number of locations. But then if we look at Bristol, one of the biggest growing skills there has been an increased demand for mental health awareness. So very different things. But the point being that there will be that combination of both technical and cross-cutting skills in both of those locations. And it's kind of unpicking that interesting detail that is going to be really interesting and useful for everyone involved in education and training solutions.
Yeah.
One thing I think is interesting is innovations in the world of work. We've all been talking like we've all worked from home, and loads of people have. But like, say, Dan, your dad being in construction, he can't. Do you know what I mean? He's got to be place-based. And like, I think it's interesting around, like, we're talking about essential skills and what are transferable and what people can stack and build upon. But Anthony, have you noticed, like, sort of, you haven't got to be in Manchester now, like, for certain roles to be delivering Amazon Web Services. And Gavin, you've got to be able to see stuff with, what does that mean internationally? Do you know what I mean? So you don't even have to be in the UK. I was dealing with someone on our recent web development in Czech Republic, and also someone in Thailand. And it was just like, it was pretty cool, So like, what does that mean for us to be thinking internationally, also regionally, around those sort of getting the essential skills in place, but having them so they're, we're sort of looking wider than, Manchester, Bristol. You could be in Exeter like I am now, or you could be in London doing the same role. It's this world of work's changing so fast,
I think from the data point of view, to begin with, we are starting to see, as you would expect, really, an increased sort of acknowledgement from employers about the remote ability. So, being able to work remotely is appearing more and more in job ads, but maybe not yet at the levels that you might expect it to. So we might think, everyone's been working remotely, so probably every job ad reflects that. It doesn't. It's still quite a small thing. And that's perhaps, I would have thought, reflective of employers, not jumping wholesale into that. So not saying, all of our workforce can work wherever they want. That's not happening quite yet. But again, it probably comes back to some of those digital skills we talked about earlier, didn't it? Because there'll be some jobs that you just can't do remotely, and there'll be some jobs that you obviously can. But then there'll be those jobs in the middle where previously you've been expected to be in an office, perhaps, or on site. But with some changes, you potentially could do a chunk of that job remotely, but it's probably going to need you to have enhanced digital skills yourself, potentially enhanced equipment. The employer is going to have to invest in those things. So quite a nuanced position, I think, about that kind of portability and remote ability of work from a data point of view.
And I think from a skills perspective, obviously what it does do, you're right, opens up the market, and probably puts that higher need for the high quality skills, because you are competing, not only geographically but nationally. And I think that's why it's so important, through our education, that we are improving standards. We're showing young people that the technical education and apprenticeships can lead to these meaningful careers. But you mentioned, I think it's a really interesting point as well, and I suppose we are kind of focusing quite a lot on digital skills, but your point around construction, actually that these skills are becoming more, these careers are becoming more digital. And something that we did a couple of years ago, we actually took a cohort of people to the international finals in Russia, and that was to look at the future of construction. And actually what was really clear is that offsite manufacturing has been really embraced by other countries, and that requires digital skills. So your things like digital construction, your BIM, and how we probably as a country are lagging behind that because we haven't embraced that as quickly as other countries have. So I think there is that real piece around actually looking, I suppose, changing the perception of these careers and industries, and actually understanding what skills are required and how to be competitive.
And it's similar. I think it's similar to the sort of automation debate. So if you think of jobs at scale or industries at scale being completely changed or taken over by automation, that's not really realistic. What we actually will probably see is bits of jobs, so chunks of jobs or tasks within jobs potentially being more susceptible to automation, and that's kind of the same as what we're talking about here. The portability of jobs might mean that there are, let's say, a chunk of tasks within construction jobs that can be done remotely, but there'll still likely be a chunk of those tasks in construction jobs that need to be done on site. And that's really how we need to try, and that's one thing we need to try and work out how Dan kind of education solutions can be designed to enable people to be able to do that, because it's quite a different model of doing a bit remotely and then a bit on site and then a bit remotely and then a bit on site, and that's quite a big change.
Well, that's where those cross-cutting essential skills like resilience, adaptability, creativity all come into play and into fruition, don't they? Because if you think about the teaching, learning, and assessment, when you're learning or training for a certain qualification or a certain program, it's about how can we make sure we're adapting that process as well to make it as realistic as possible, so that we're actually preparing people for what industry, and it becomes more situational and real life working environments for people who are going to be entering those industries. Gavin, world skills, Gavin. Just going back a step, do you think there's anything that we could probably learn from the approach of other countries? Obviously, world skills is, working with over 80 different countries on various different things around, all things skills related. Are there anything that we could learn? Are we behind any of the curves that we're seeing in other areas? Is there anything that we can do, or any approaches of other countries where we can kind of almost anticipate some of the solutions and skills needs that we're going to need? And then Anthony, if there's any global trends that we can maybe bring in there, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned it earlier, but I think it is about that accepting that pace of change and those technologies. So, our data shows when we benchmark and we are lagging behind, certain countries. And the key piece to that is that actually these countries are working with industry, and they're understanding what those needs and the speed of, change, and then embedding that into their skill system. And countries recently did a bit of research, that looked at countries like Hungary and India and Japan, and how they actually really use their knowledge economy and their skills economy to really drive a growing economy. And so there's a real piece about, it's not one or the other, it's about combining those, expertise and really driving that skills economy. We've got an example here, we've talked about the vaccine that we've created, and we really talk about the knowledge economy and how to develop it. But what we're not talking about are the technicians that, ran all the machinery and actually, delivered all of these vaccines. So there's a real focus that we can learn from, how to really drive that skills economy.
Yeah, just from the data side, I think again that information piece is key. So, I previously cited those UK differences between Manchester and Bristol. And the same applies in other countries. So MZ Burning Glass did some research a while back now that was looking at the shape of jobs, the skills shape of jobs in the US. And it's a fascinating report. But it as a quick example, it highlighted that manufacturing jobs and manufacturing skills would look very, very different in New York City to Minneapolis, or Kansas City. So that there'd be very, very different requirements of a job that has the same job title in different parts of the country. Now that's really, really at scale in the US because it's such a big area, but it applies in all kind of global labor markets. There's that regional nuance that can be quite significant.
I'm so annoyed because we're out of time. It feels like we have just literally scratched the surface. Go, right, let's get into this now. And I just think, thank you everyone for what's been a really, really, really fascinating session. I'm going to run us over by asking everyone a question, actually, because everyone lives and breathes this here, and it's brilliant to see the passion, also the knowledge of everyone coming out for this, and hopefully everyone in the audience has been able to take something away from this. If you could dream and dream big, what would you want to see that addresses employability but skills gaps in particular? Anthony, what would you want to see?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record, but information is key and information is king. So
totally
being able to equip everyone involved in this question with up-to-date information on how things are changing at scale across a national economy, but more importantly at a local level, is really the only way that you're going to be able to understand what's coming next and be able to equip those involved in the system with what they need.
Yeah, Gavin, what would you want to see?
Yeah, I suppose responsiveness, so it's working with industry, being able to actually, to Anthony's point, looking at that local level and saying, what are the skills we need? How are we going to develop them? And actually ensuring that skills are the solution, and they're not, the afterthought once, decisions and investments are made.
Yeah,
Dan, what would you want to see?
I think, if I'm honest, right, if you're going to help people to upskill, reskill, and have a positive career as well as personal lives, I think we've touched on it quite a lot today. It's about how do we deliver those technical, vocational, programs and skills and knowledge, whilst embedding all of those really, really fundamental, essential skills like creativity, resilience, problem solving, empathy, compassion. All of that is equally as important as the technical and vocational skills that you're learning. So I would like to see that more across, the education ecosystem.
Gavin, can we ask you the same question?
Yeah, basically it's all of this combined really. So I think it's a whole thing around employability and skills. If we can help people to be able to overcome those barriers, so as like we can open up regionality and stuff like that, but at the same time equip people to be able to have like a job for life and a fulfilling job for life. That's got to be key, isn't it? And if we could inspire young people, so like my dad, when we took him he was very privileged. He was able to go to WorldSkills Calgary and work on a plane and open up his eyes and mind to be able to do that. He's on oil rigs and all sorts of stuff. It was amazing how we can sort of extend what's going on with that. But also, Anthony, data is so key for us to be able to make informed decisions. I do it with everything with me for our business. I'm sure everyone else does too. So how can we keep that going of inspiring individuals, inspiring regions, keeping that going, keep looking at the data and keep looking to the future. We haven't touched on metaverse. We haven't touched on AI, cobots, all of that. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, what does it mean?
Episode 2.
It's such an exciting time. We're living in such an exciting time. It's been so rubbish since COVID, but this next bit just feels exciting. And I just think, how can we all come together as a collective to actually share all those different knowledge points, from data to ideas to like the futurists, to be able to really come together. So that's what I'd like to see. Do you know what I mean? To bring everyone together. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for today. I've loved it, and it just felt like we could talk forever on this. And Dan, you've been a brilliant co-host. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
This is a total co-produce, so big thank you to Team NTFE. Lindsay, as always, has been brilliant. Sam is the producer from NTFE side of things on this and has done an amazing job. Episode 2 is going to be brilliant. Leah, thank you for the background. Team FE News, you've put this all together beautifully. Finley, Kelly, thank you everyone, and all of the audience. We've got a really cool episode every Thursday for the next 6 weeks, 10 o'clock. Join us live, FE News, and also all day catch up. And it's all about the future of work. It's so important, this next stage of the pandemic. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Have a great day. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.